Today we're going to be going down memory lane to talk about the Nexus 6.
I'ma bring it back, like turn up the track, like let the bass drop. I'm living this life right, forget about the past.
So we're going to talk about all of the specs, how it lives up today, and I also took the Nexus 6 on a road trip and tried to use it like I would a regular phone. Spoiler alert, it didn't go too well, but we'll get into that later. So let's start things off with the specs, because this was a huge deal for at the time, because this was a powerhouse of a phone. When this launched in 2014, it didn't hold anything back. It had a massive screen at the time. It was 5.96 inches, which is basically 6 inches, where the Nexus 6 kind of gets its name from. The display was 1440 by 2560, and it was an OLED display. It is a little oversaturated in my opinion. When I go from the Nexus 6 to my iPhone, it's like insanely different with the saturation, but my device doesn't have any screen burn, which is really awesome for such an old device. Even my iPhone 13 has some screen burn, unfortunately. But nonetheless, it was a great display. As far as the processor go, it was a Snapdragon 805. It had 3 gigabytes of RAM, and the storage options were pretty generous at the time too, at 32 gigabytes and 64 gigabytes. The camera setup includes a 13 megapixel rear camera. It has optical image stabilization, flash around the camera itself, and then the front-facing camera was 2 megapixels. The rear camera was pretty decent. A lot of the reviews at the time didn't give it great reviews, but it has this feature which is huge at the time, but not so much anymore. It had HDR+. If you use HDR+, you can get some pretty decent photos with this. It is a little sluggish, and it takes some time to open the app itself, but overall it took good pictures in bright lit situations. Here are some pictures and video side by side with my iPhone 13 Pro and the Nexus 6. Overall, I think it's really decent. 10 years is a lot of time for camera technology to progress, and so I think it holds up pretty well. Powering the phone is a 3200 milliamp hour battery, and it has wireless charging, which is really nice, especially since I have wireless chargers around, and so it's easy enough to just set it down, get a little charge, and then, watch some YouTube on it, listen to music, whatever. Now, something that was a little bit polarizing at the time was the design. It is a very, very, very big phone. Even in today's standards, it feels huge in my hand, like really big, even though the screen size is technically smaller than my iPhone 13 Pro. But I think it feels so big due to the width, because it is a proper 16:9 display. It's not only tall, but also really wide, which kind of makes it a little bit difficult to grip with one hand. But with the sloped back design, it feels decent enough in your hands. Despite its size, it is still lightweight and has a pretty premium feel with the metal frame, despite actually being made of mostly soft touch plastic, which does feel good and still holds up even today, 10 years later. Now let's talk a little bit about how it handled during my road trip. So we went from Wisconsin to South Carolina. I did not use this the entire time because it was just way too slow on Android 7. Now, the thing that really made the phone sluggish was just opening the apps. Once the apps were opened, they were easy enough to navigate and they were not too sluggish. They just, worked at a normal pace. But for instance, I loaded up Google Maps. It took about 5 minutes to load up to a point where the app was actually usable. And then once it was loaded up, it was usable. I used it as a GPS for a little while, even used it to stream some music to listen to on the way. And so it did work as a phone. I even would make some calls and text my wife from it, and she hated seeing the green bubbles. But just something I got to deal with Android phones. But it was usable as a phone. And speaking of apps, some apps that just didn't work at all were Twitter, Nest, Amazon. Apps that I use pretty regularly I was just not able to download at all because it wasn't optimized for Android 7, which is a very old version of Android, which is very understandable. So if you're wondering how I was able to use this phone on a road trip where there's no Wi-Fi, I didn't use my phone's hotspot or anything. I actually used Mint Mobile, which kind of helped make this video possible. So I'm super excited to let you guys know, and this is a huge step for just my channel in general, about this partnership with Mint Mobile. So if you've been kind of sick of all of these rising prices with services like Netflix or Spotify or all of these other services raising their prices, Mint Mobile is just a little bit different. Mint Mobile isn't raising their prices like all of these other companies have been, which is something that I really like about Mint Mobile. So on this trip, I used Mint Mobile on the Nexus 6 the entire time, and I literally had service the entire time. Even when we were in the mountains of North Carolina, I still had service, which is pretty cool. We were literally in the middle of nowhere at a sketchy gas station, scared for our lives, but we needed gas and it had service in the middle of nowhere. And so I found that Mint Mobile offers the same fast, reliable, premium wireless as other providers. And while we were on our road trip, Apple was having a keynote and I really wanted to watch the keynote. And so I started watching it on my phone, but I didn't have any service with Verizon. And so I switched over to my Nexus 6 and I had service and I was able to watch the keynote, which was super nice. And so I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't have Mint Mobile. So if that doesn't convince you to switch, I don't know what will, other than the pricing. It was just as fast as any other network, took calls, able to stream YouTube videos, and everything was seamless. Switching to Mint Mobile is super easy too, thanks to digital eSIM cards, where you can sign up, activate immediately from the comfort of your own home, which is super nice. And if your phone doesn't have an eSIM, so they actually sent me a SIM card and it was easy enough to just pop right into the Nexus 6, set things up, and I was good to go in minutes. So if you want to save money without the sacrifice, go to the link in the description to get premium wireless for just $15 when you sign up for a 3-month plan. So to complete the nostalgic Android experience that I had back in 2014, I also purchased a Moto 360 that you see on my wrist right now. And you guys, I don't know what Apple is doing with their design, but this Moto 360, the design is incredible. I love it. Sometimes if I'm just charging my Apple Watch, I'll put it on and, you know, I prefer this design over the Apple Watch. Round smartwatches just have like this look to them that it's classic, it's timeless. I love the design of the Moto 360. I think it's even better than a lot of stuff that's out right now, even from Google with the Pixel Watch. I love that it's just a circle and then a watch band. I really like that style and design, and they ended up going away from that with the Moto 360 second generation. You know, having the Nexus 6 and a Moto 360 was the dream Android experience for back in the day. Now, surprisingly, the Moto 360 still kind of holds up with battery life. Once I got it all set up and ready to go, once all of the apps and stuff loaded, all that kind of stuff, I was able to get through a full day of battery life where I just wore this thing for the entire day. I didn't do much on it. I didn't use it for anything other than just looking at the time. So that's probably why it lasted so long. But I got through an entire day with this 10-year-old device, which I think is really cool. Now, my watch is a little bit defective. When I bought it on eBay, it didn't have the screen on or anything, but I got it for like, I think it was like $30 when all of the other watches were like $60, $70. There are a few dead pixels, but honestly, it doesn't really take away from the experience at all, especially when you have a dark watch face. But I was surprisingly impressed with the Moto 360 10 years later. Now, to wrap it all up, should you buy a Nexus 6 in 2024 as a daily driver? No, not at all. It doesn't really work. With Android 7 being so slow, apps aren't optimized for it, and it would just be a terrible experience, but I don't think anyone would use it as a daily driver. But if you just want that nostalgia, if you were really into tech YouTube back in the day, or if you're just really into old phones, Google doesn't make the Nexus line anymore, so I think these old phones are kind of cool in a way. And so, you know, if you just want to pick one up for a good price, go for it. They're fun to play around on and they're not really too expensive. So thanks for watching. And if you're looking to save money with Mint Mobile, Check them out, link in description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
From Jan to December, different direction. I don't need no compass. All about the moments to remember. Yes, just